Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Terry Melvin, and I'm the Vice President of NCAP. Today, we have with us Rob Packard. He's a regulatory consultant with 20 years' experience in the medical device, pharmaceutical, and biotechnology industries. He is a graduate of UConn in chemical engineering. Rob was a senior manager at several medical device companies, including president, CEO of a laparoscopic imaging company. His quality management system expertise covers all aspects of developing, training, implementing, and maintaining ISO 13485 and ISO 14971 certification. From 2009 to 2012, he was a lead auditor and instructor for BSI. Rob's specialty is regulatory submissions of high-risk medical devices for CE marking and Canadian medical device applications. He founded Medical Device Academy in 2012 as a consulting firm focused on helping medical device companies with regulatory submissions and ISO 13485 certification. The firm has grown to 7 consultants in 1 year. The most favorite part of his job is training others. So we're going to have fun today. The topic is how to prepare for your FDA inspection. Rob, it's all yours.
Thank you, Terry. As Terry said, I used to be a BSI auditor. I was a lead auditor and instructor, helping companies get ISO certified and CE marked, as well as Canadian license. But when the FDA comes up, it's a little bit of a different story. With an ISO auditor, a lot of people say, oh, that's just ISO, because those guys are looking for conformity. We're asking questions to try to fill in the checkbox a lot of times. But the inspectors have a little different agenda. They're looking for companies that are making misbranded or adulterated product, and they have the ability to shut a company down. They have the ability to prosecute and put people in jail. Not necessarily just the inspector that you're meeting, but the FDA as a whole. And so people fear the FDA, and fear and anxiety are part of what is the big problem about handling an FDA inspection, is knowing what to expect takes some of that fear away. The other thing that doesn't particularly help is every once in a while you have a Health and Human Services officer show up with a black suit and stripes on it. And this is the official uniform, and it's designed specifically to intimidate. You also occasionally have federal marshals that come in serious situations where product is being quarantined and confiscated, or records are being taken. In these cases, it's very intimidating, and there are a lot of horror stories out there for companies that have had to go through this. But my first FDA inspection that I ever went through happened to be one of those special scenarios where the federal marshals came in and there was a $50 million recall. So for a newbie to the medical device industry, going through that your first time, it's a little scary. But the compliment from the FDA inspector is we did a great job of preparing everything for destruction. Because in this case, we had a $50 million recall, a product that was labeled as sterile, and it wasn't. And it all had to be recalled. And companies don't recover from that scenario. So you know what's coming. You know people are going to get laid off. You know as part of management you're going to be on the hot seat. You're going to have to answer questions. In my case, I had only been there a couple of days, so it went from, great, welcome to your new job, to, well, I hope your resume is still hot and up to date, because after we get finished destroying all these records and signing off the FDA, then we're going to look for a new job. So hopefully this will help you prepare for your own FDA inspection that won't be nearly as traumatic as mine was, and hopefully your outcome will be a lot better. But one of the things I'd like to point out right here at the beginning is there's a link at the bottom of this page for a a blog that is on the Medical Device Academy website. It was written by Susan Christie, and it tells you what to do in the first 30 minutes. And this is really unique. I see a lot of presentations on what to do to prepare for an FDA inspection, but you always want to start out on the right foot. Your first impression with the FDA inspector is critical to set the tone of how things are going to go for that meeting, and you want to come off across as professional and prepared. And everybody should know what they have to do, sort of like a fire drill. You don't want people running around scared and screaming. You want people that are calm, organized, and do the right thing. So click on that link after you've got the slide deck and go read that blog, and it'll help you out a lot. And there are a lot of links throughout this presentation that I think will help you equally. So The FDA's approach to inspections. Primarily, it's the district office that's developing the schedule. They have a budget, they have a specific number of inspectors, and they have to get through their agenda of they have to inspect all these companies that are Class 2 and Class 3 product manufacturers. And they're not going to be able to get through all of them in a year. In fact, sometimes they're running behind schedule, and it takes them more years than what their quota is. They're supposed to get through in 2 years. It might take 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years. So how do you handle that? Well, budgets are not increasing. Number of personnel are not increasing in this current climate of business. So the FDA's only option is to do a risk-based prioritization, and they say, you know, who did we inspect? Who was the company that we inspected the longest ago? So how long has it been? They want to know the last inspection date and sort of rank it from oldest to newest. So if you were just inspected last year, you're at the bottom of the list, and you're probably not going to be inspected unless there was a problem. But if it's been 7 years since you were inspected, you're probably near the top. The other thing that goes into play is what is the classification of the device. Class 3s, they're usually scheduled as part of a PMA inspection, and they have to be completed before you can get your product approved. Whereas the Class 2s, those are routine, and the Class 1s are often skipped unless there's a serious problem with a company or recalls and medical device reports. So if you don't make the cut and your company is below the line, then next year you move up on the list. And that's how the FDA does it, and that might be the same approach you're using for something like supplier audits, but this is the approach that they're taking for inspections. Here's the just sort of a snapshot and some examples of different types of devices and classifications of risk. So Class 1 is the lowest risk device. These devices often do not require pre-market notification or a 510K. They're exempt. And some examples of those are reusable instruments that may be sterile or non-sterile, but if they're sterilized, they're often sterilized by the user, so they'll be put in an autoclave and wrapped and things like that. The Class 2 devices are a little higher risk. They have often special controls. So like an endoscope, people may say, well, what can go wrong with an endoscope? Well, number one, it's used for diagnostics and making decisions as a doctor when you're looking inside the body. And so it has to have the right color. If you're a urologist, you need to be able to make a diagnosis based on color. You need to be able to see things clearly. And there are some cases where endoscopes have gotten so hot from the light source that they've actually caused a fire in the OR. So there are some serious risks, and they actually have a test that you're required to do in these special controls to make sure the endoscope doesn't get overheated. The Class 3 devices, some of them don't require 510Ks. In the example that I provided there, it's a DefibTech defibrillator. It's an automatic, or AED, automatic electronic defibrillator, where it actually tells the user verbally what to do. Says where to place it, says that it's the right place, tells that it's charging, and then says, go ahead, activate, press the button. The FDA has had so many adverse events with this particular type of device that they've actually switched it now so it no longer is a 510K device and it requires a PMA. And that's more typical of a Class 3 device. So the Class 3 devices typically are not 510K, they're a pre-market approval. It's a very expensive, long process that usually requires a clinical study. The purpose of the FDA inspections, number one, it's just to monitor. That would be routine. They follow up on recalls, adverse events. They also have upped their the number of inspections they're doing of foreign companies. So any foreign manufacturers, they're going and visiting them more than they ever used to. They even have offices in China now and other countries. And then they have the pre-approval inspections that I described earlier for the FDA going in and making sure companies are ready for PMA approval of these Class 3 high-risk devices. But these are the primary purposes: routine monitoring, follow-up on serious problems with recalls, adverse events, and then so the international companies that they have some concerns about and can't see, so they want to look a little bit closer, and then the pre-market approval devices. Here's the FDA's approach. It's actually documented. You can actually download the 108-page QSIT inspection guide, and this is a diagram that the FDA has of the sort of the different elements of the QSIT approach. You can see there that you have 7 different elements. So you have major quality systems, and then you have minor systems. And if you want to download the manual yourself, it's free. It's a PDF, and I've provided the bit.ly link, so you can click on that and download the QSIT guide. And it's a great reading if you really want to prepare and learn a lot about the process and what the FDA inspectors are supposed to be doing and which direction they go and how they conduct their audits, how they conduct sampling. It's a great guide for you to learn how to do inspections and what to expect. It also can be something you might emulate yourself when you're doing internal audits to prepare people and make them more used to what an inspection's like. You don't want everything to be like your ISO audits. You might want to make a few of them like a mock FDA inspection. Here are the 4 major quality systems: management controls, design controls, production process controls, and CAPA. There are some minor elements that are subsystems of those. And then we have 3 minor subsystems, the sort of the maintenance functions, raw material controls, like warehouse, and then you have your document and record controls. And usually, when you have an FDA inspector doing a routine inspection, they're going to be looking at all of these elements, but they focus on the 4 majors. Here are the 4 types of inspections. Most people are familiar with the level 2, which is the comprehensive QSIT inspection, where they look at all 4 major quality systems, and they may sample the 3 minors as well. The level 1s, if you've had a successful comprehensive level 2 inspection in the past, they may say, you know, you're a low-risk company, we don't have a lot of resources this year, but we're overdue for inspecting you, so we'll just give you a level 1, an abbreviated QSIT. One inspector comes in, looks at CAPA and 1 other major subsystem, so we call it a CAPA plus 1. And it used to be the inspectors would come in and just look at management systems, so CAPA and management would get looked at all the time, and they've redone their guidelines, and so now you have to rotate what the other major is. So you can't just keep on doing an abbreviated inspection and look at always at management. You got to look at CAPA and management 1 year, CAPA and design controls another year, CAPA and production process controls another year, and you rotate it. Level 3, that's compliance follow-up. This is where you had some 483s that were serious, a warning letter. They're coming back just specifically to see how you've done on corrections and corrective actions specific to that, or a recall, and they want to make sure that you've done that correctly. And so it might actually be longer than a comprehensive audit because they're going to sample so many records and you're in a fairly high-risk situation. But these are not routine, and they could be just 6 months, 12 months after a routine inspection. The last one is a special for cause audit. These are ones that are surprised. They're not follow-up. They've received complaints. They're worried about a recall. They might be coming into a supplier where they couldn't get the information they needed out of the manufacturer, so they go to the supplier. But these are special audits. They might be very much like a follow-up audit. However, there wasn't a previous audit that triggered it. It's other events that have triggered it. Here's the most critical quality system or subsystem within your quality system. It's the CAPA system. And this diagram was actually drawn for me by Kim Troutman, who's one of the authors of the QSR and helped draft the ISO 1345 standard as well. And she drew this along with some other instructors when I learned the QSR and CAPA. And this is how they showed it. This is, there are a lot of inputs into your CAPA system. It's not just complaints. It's not just non-conforming materials. It's all of these things should be inputs into your CAPA system. And if you read carefully through the QSR, there are even some specific ones that they require, like service. A company that doesn't trend their service reports and have that as an input in the CAPA system, that's a problem. And then there always has to be this effectiveness check to make sure your CAPAs are actually working. So that's that recycle loop. Next slide, management review. There are 3 areas that the FDA is not supposed to look at, but they can still touch these areas. The FDA always says we can get to anything through your CAPA system, like the last slide showed, but the FDA is not supposed to look at your management review meeting minutes. What they can do when they look at management systems is they can say, let me see your management review procedure. Let me see your organization chart. Let me see proof that you've assigned the responsibility of a management rep. Let me see the date of your most recent review. Let me see proof you actually conducted it. Maybe an invitation to everybody, an agenda for the meeting. They're not going to actually make sure that you covered all the necessary things in your procedure because they're not allowed to look at the minutes. But if you have a whole bunch of management reviews that you've conducted and no CAPAs resulting from the management reviews, then they question whether these management reviews are even effective. So that's how they get at management review, even though they're not supposed to look at the minutes. So they can ask for certain things. Internal audits falls into the same category. The FDA is not supposed to look at your internal audit reports, but they can verify that you're conducting internal audits by reading your procedure, making sure you have internal auditor training requirements documented, making sure that you have an internal audit schedule, and you're complying with that internal audit. And once again, through the CAPA system, if you have no CAPAs resulting from internal audits, there's a problem. Last but not least, supplier audits. The FDA is not supposed to look at your actual supplier audit reports. However, they are allowed to look at your purchasing procedure and see how you control suppliers. Make sure you actually have an approved supplier list. So if you really want to test the FDA, go ahead. Don't have your approved supplier list under document control. Leave out a couple of critical suppliers and see what happens. You'll end up with a couple of 483s, one of them for document control and another one for supplier controls under 820.50. So they look at this, even though they can't look at the audit reports, they can tell whether you're qualifying your suppliers and evaluating them on an ongoing basis. One of the things they're looking for, do you have a supplier audit schedule? A company that says we don't audit any of our suppliers, probably not going to do too well, and the FDA is going to spend a lot of time looking at incoming inspections to see if the parts are actually good. They also expect to see supplier corrective action requests, or CAPAs, initiated by your suppliers to address quality problems that you've seen at incoming inspection. So that's another thing that you should see in the CAPA system, and if they see nothing, they get a little bit suspicious. A lot of people ask me, clients ask me, when will the FDA be likely to come in and inspect us? And so I always start with, well, when was the last time they were here? In theory, they should be back every 2 years for a Class 2 device for routine inspections. But each district is a little different. If you're in Tampa, Florida, you might have a district office is right around the corner, and they may be coming every 18 months. In California, I'm hearing it's almost every year. So it depends on where you're located. But other places, like West Virginia, you might only have one inspector for the entire state. It's a mountainous region, not a lot of companies. The inspector may not get to everybody in the 2-year cycle like they're supposed to. So those are things that affect the frequency of the FDA visits. But what you should know is that in 2010, the FDA increased the number of inspections by 25% because a couple years prior to that, they increased the number of inspectors and they trained them up. They hired a bunch of green people right out of master's programs and bachelor's programs, and they trained them how to be inspectors, and now those people are going out and auditing your company, and they've got a few years under their belt now, so they're actually experienced now and out there doing audits on their own, and have really increased the ability of the FDA to comply with their agendas or quotas for getting a number of FDA inspections done in a year. And you can see that by the number of inspections here, 2,550 in 2009, 3,174 in 2010. So how much lead time do you get? In theory, nothing. You get no warning at all. These are surprise inspections. However, the FDA, if it's a routine inspection, frequently calls you on a Friday afternoon. So they've finished up a report on Thursday for the last company that they inspected the week before. They worked all that week on writing up their reports and talking with their boss and getting everything settled on the last company they visited. And Friday they look who's next on their list, and they give a call and say, I'm going to be there on Tuesday. Now, you could say, well, nobody's going to be here. And if you're a company of 5 people, you might be able to get away with that argument, but it's just going to delay the inevitable, and they're not going to give you a second chance. They're only going to give you this one buy, and it only may be a buy of a week. It's really not going to buy you much. If you can conduct the audit, you should, and you may not be able to postpone. The nice thing about getting a warning on Friday is that you can ask, well, what is your name? Where are you coming from? Do you need directions? Do you need any recommendation for a hotel? If they're going to be staying multiple days, you might ask them if they know or expect how many days they might be there. It's often longer than however long they say. They say, oh, it'll be a couple days, and then it ends up being 4, or sometimes even 2 weeks. But another thing you might ask is it going to be 1 inspector or 2? This is important because if you have a larger facility, you might have 2 inspectors. If they're going to have 2 inspectors, ask if 1 is training. If it's a training exercise, then you can count on it being a comprehensive inspection, not an abbreviated inspection, and they're going to go through everything by the book because they're training somebody else, and they're not going to cut you any slack. So these are things you want to ask if you can when you talk to the person on Friday. Don't panic. Don't freak out. You're getting warning. Be excited. Say, oh, this is great. I get a warning ahead of time. I can prepare people. And you should use this opportunity on the phone with the FDA inspector to ask some key questions that will help you prepare for the next week. Often I get a call on Friday afternoon saying, hey, can you be here next Tuesday because the FDA is going to be here. So I have to come in and help the client and help them prepare. And Monday night we're going through CAPAs and we're finding some errors and we're fixing them, and we're maybe making some last-minute revisions to things that should have been handled and were left unfinished. So that's our Monday night activities, doing last-minute prep. Not a great idea, but the FDA is predictable. So sometimes you can help yourself out and make that first impression better by looking at the things you know they're going to ask for first. For the international inspections, you actually have pluses and minuses. The plus is you get 6 to 8 weeks notice. The minus, it's always a comprehensive inspection. It's usually quite long because they might not get back in the 2-year cycle because they have to get visas and it's such a long lead time and everything. But the other negative of the international inspections is it's a 1 strike and you don't get a second strike. You actually have something they call automatic detention. If you get a warning letter the first time, U.S. companies can go on consent decree if they have repeat problems. They can work with the FDA. The FDA has the jurisdiction that they can force the company to do things. But the FDA doesn't have jurisdiction over foreign companies, so all they do is stop it at the border, and you can't even ship it in. So that's one of the big negatives of having a foreign firm, even though you get lots of warning. So how does the FDA prepare? A lot of people are asking me, like, how do we prepare? But they aren't thinking like an FDA inspector. If you can think like an FDA inspector, then you know what to prepare yourself because you know how they're preparing. They only know what you've told them. They only know what records you've provided them. So they're going to look at your website. They're going to look at any MDRs that you've submitted to MedWatch, so Form 3500. They're going to look, I'm sorry, 3500A. They're also going to look at any user facility. So if a hospital reports something, they report it on Form 3500. So they'll also look what the hospitals have reported. And if you see something on there that was reported by a hospital that you didn't know about, you should have reported it too and done an investigation. Corrections and removals. They know anything about any recalls that you've reported to the FDA. Any recalls that you have not reported to the FDA better be rock solid, and you must have a documented reason why you didn't report it. Registration and listing. You have to have you have to register manufacturers, and a lot of contract manufacturers now have to be registered as well if they're making a finished device. Well, the FDA can look at that information, see what types of devices you make, and they're going to go right for the high-risk devices. If you have Class 1s and one Class 2, they're always going to look at the Class 2. And then previous inspection reports. They always, just like an internal auditor, always pull up the past inspection report, and they're going to close any 43s from the last inspection. Here's some problem areas. So what is the FDA hitting people with now? What are they getting 43s for? This is it. Design controls is number 1 on the list. Complaint investigations and MDRs are number 2 and 3 on the list. Purchasing controls is in the top 5 there. And then Part 11 compliance is something that they didn't look at in the past, but they are now. They are inspecting and looking at Part 11 compliance, and that's the electronic record requirements. I've underlined in red here the reporting of adverse events. go look at the new regulation for 803. It becomes effective August 14th of 2015, and I've provided a link not only for the new revision, but I've also provided a link there for a gap analysis. So if you register on our website and enter your information, then you get access to the gap analysis. It's free, and that can help you prepare your revised procedure before it becomes due next year. But the big thing is now all your medical device reports have to be submitted electronically, and you're going to need an electronic submissions gateway account. The FDA also has some trainings available for that I can point you to. Be prepared for lot traceability audits. What I mean by this is the FDA is going to pick a specific product. Like I said, if you have a Class 1 product, mostly Class 1 products and one Class 2, they're going to focus on the Class 2, the one Class 2 every time. So they're going to look at your design history file for that product. They're going to see if it's up to date. They're going to see if you've made any changes that were not submitted as a 510K or a special 510K for clearance of those changes. There might be a catch-up that's due if you made a lot of changes and didn't submit. So that's one of the things to look for. They're going to ask you, after they've done that, they're going to ask you for a copy of your DMR, your device master record. This is your recipe for how to make the product. You might use an index, but they're going to ask for that. And if you don't know what a DMR is, you have some fancy footwork to do. You're going to have to come up with something that looks like a DMR. And your technical file index might be a great place to start if you have CE marking, because the two documents are almost interchangeable. And then last but not least, they're going to pick a recent lot, a DHR, a device history record, and they're going to work backwards through all the way to the raw materials for that lot, or lots, depending on how big your facility is and how much production you have going on. So this is what I call traceability audits. You start with the design file, you go to the the device master file, and then the device history record, or batch records. When the FDA comes in, one of the things you have to be very careful of is who's talking to them and what they say. You can't really talk for other people. That's obstructing the audit. You can't not let the FDA talk to people that they want to talk to, but you also might be able to steer them a bit. So if you have a Del Griffith on your staff that likes to talk a lot, and he's a really great guy, but he talks way too much, maybe you want to ask him to go home early, or take the week off, or maybe go do a supplier audit that week. And if you have a chatty Kathy in your office, you might want to do the same thing for her. Who should speak with the FDA? I went to one company and I was asked to do an internal audit of their complaint and MDR system, because that's one of the highest risk areas for getting 483s, and the company had a lot of them because of the high risk nature of their product. And the person that I interviewed was phenomenal. They were definitely the #1 person you wanted to put in front of the FDA. They were a manager. They were in charge of the group that was responsible for complaint handling and making reporting decisions. And the woman gave me nothing that I didn't ask for. She was just like this Easter Island headstone here. She wasn't going to give me anything that I didn't want, or anything that I didn't ask for. But at the same time, she didn't try to withhold things from me. She just sat there comfortably while I was silent, trying to get her to offer more, and she didn't offer a thing. When I would ask a question, if I made the mistake of asking a closed-ended question that would be answered with yes or no, she gave me the answer yes or no. If I was correct and I answered or asked a question that was open-ended and required her to volunteer more information, give a procedure number, give me an example, describe something, I got a lot more information out of her, but still she didn't talk too much. This is the kind of person you want. So when you have an FDA mock inspection, you want to clearly identify who the people are that will interview you well and try to put them in front of the FDA whenever you can. Backroom preparations. A lot of companies are not familiar with what a backroom is for, or what it's all about, or how to do it. This is something you really need to learn. The back room is what is your support for the front room where the FDA inspector is. The back room it's not a secret room. It's not the document creation room where you're creating documents. It's a place where you're keeping track of the requests by the FDA and making sure they get delivered in a timely manner. It's also where you're giving people that are going to go next into the room an opportunity to read the documents or review them quickly and ask any questions about it if they didn't personally look at it in the last year or two before they walk in that room. So oftentimes you'll actually put one of your best people in quality in that room because they've got to prep all the people that are walking in and remind them of, what is the FDA looking for and what's in this document, do you have any questions? And there should be a drill sergeant in that room, really controlling things and making sure things go smoothly, because those document requests need to arrive in a timely manner, and you want to keep it coming, and you don't want to miss anyone. You don't want to give them the wrong documents. You don't want to give them documents that are incomplete. And it can be kind of a stressful war room kind of environment, so you try to keep the group happy. So in my next slide here, we provide a little diagram of what your inspection rooms might look like. So you have your back room on the left, and then you have your front room on the right. And you can see you get a lot more going on in the back room than in the front room. In the front room, all you need is the FDA inspector, the management rep, a subject matter expert that's really in the hot seat being interviewed. That's why it's close to the door. That person's coming in and out, and it's a different person all the time. And then your scribe. The scribe's job is not to help. The scribe's job is not to talk. The scribe's job is to type notes. You want a stenographer in that position. And just like a stenographer in court, sometimes the management rep of the FDA asks them to repeat something back. So sometimes the FDA may know, oh, great, you got a scribe in here. What did he just say? Could you please repeat that number to me? I didn't get it in my notes. Can you please put that down? Or repeat that for me so I can write it down in my notebooks. The FDA is always using a green or black bound notebook. They're handwriting everything, and they ask for copies of everything. Only give them copies. Don't give them originals. And if you're giving them one of those documents they're not supposed to have, like a management review, an internal audit, or a supplier audit, because they asked for it and you felt you would comply with them rather than try to hide things from them, make it very clear. You can see the copy. You can't take the copy with you because they're not allowed to have it. So that's the way you handle things when the FDA asks for something they're not supposed to have. You don't give them the impression you're trying to hide things, but you make it very clear this is a copy and you can't take it with you. You can read it, take notes, but you can't take it with you. All the other documents, they can take copies with them. And in some cases, they might even take product. Document requests. You want to log every single request. When did they request it? Which inspector? Because you might have two inspectors. Who is the runner that's assigned to go get that document? If you have lots of requests, two auditors, you're going to have people running to the record room, retrieving things. Maybe they'll ask for maintenance logs. If you have runners that are really doing your job, you might get the inspector to spend 90% of their time in the conference room where you can control them. Once they go out on the production floor, you're at their mercy, and if they're a really good inspector, they're going to find things you never intended for them to find. That's what I excel at as an auditor. I go out there and I look on the production floor and I look for things in production process controls, and I interview people on the production floor that aren't prepped ahead of time. You want to keep the inspectors in the room if you can. If they want to go out on the floor, they can, and you can't prevent them from doing that. But the faster you get those runners delivering documents and keeping track of getting them there on time, the better the chances you're going to have everything under control and running smoothly. But never give the inspector an original. Never, ever, ever, ever. They might write on it. Well, now they've modified or changed your original record. This is a real problem. And sometimes you can't tell the difference between the original and the copy. So make sure it's stamped, uncontrolled copy, and date it, initial it. Have two copies, one for the management rep so they can keep it in their copy piles so you can go back and say, well, these were the documents the FDA asked for, this was the order they asked for them, and then you can prepare for your next FDA inspection based on what you saw in this FDA inspection. Now we get to the stuff that scares everybody, 483s. This is an FDA observation of nonconformity. It's noncompliance with one of the requirements of the QSR, which is 21 CFR 820, or 803, which is the reporting requirements, or 806, which is the recall requirements. There are some other things like IDs, which would be 812. There's other stuff too, but whenever it's a nonconformity observation, the FDA calls it FDA Form 43, because that's the form they write the observations on for their report. And if you want to learn more about these, I provide some links on where you can get a list of all these 43s that they've published recently. And the observations noted on this form are not an exhaustive listing of objectionable conditions. So this is something they're going to say in their 43. They're going to say that you're responsible for conducting your own internal self-audits. So it's not sufficient just to go with just what the FDA wrote. Those are examples. Just like an ISO audit, you're supposed to go back and do your own investigation as part of the CAPA and figure out if there are additional problems in other areas of the facility and indicate those in the investigation as well as in your corrective action plan. And if you haven't done that, then you really haven't met the requirements for responding to a 483. Here's something new I've added to this presentation. It's the most common 483s in 2013. So it's fiscal year 2013. The FDA works on an fourth quarter for them, or fourth quarter for a calendar is the first quarter for them. So their fiscal year 2014 actually began in October. So October, November, December is the beginning of their 2014 fiscal year. And looking at 2013's data, here is what we saw as the #1 hitters. We categorized each of the 483s based on the primary clause that, or section of this, of the 21 CFR 820 that was applicable. So 820.30, the first one is design controls, then you have CAPA, complaints, MDRs, then 70 is production and process controls, 50 is purchasing and supplier controls, 80 is acceptance of raw materials in process and finished goods, 75 is validation, then internal auditing. It goes on down the list. But these are the top hitters for the FDA. And so if you want to learn more about it, how we did our analysis and how you might use that information, click on the first link at the top there. That's our blog about it. And then down at the bottom, you can actually download our Excel spreadsheet where we've done a Pareto analysis of the 483s. And you can use the same thing next year for the data from the FDA. So once you've had an inspection, at the end of the inspection, you have one of 3 possible scenarios. The best possible scenario, no action indicated. So there are no 483s at all. This is a fantastic outcome. You would love to have this. And a lot of companies brag about it, but as I say as an auditor, audits and inspections are just samples. So just because they found nothing doesn't mean there isn't anything to worry about. So you really need to keep up on your internal audits and should, the FDA inspectors are not all created equal. They might not be doing as good a job. When you switch inspectors, you may get a very different outcome. The next possible scenario, and the more common one, is voluntary action indicated. So this is where you received a 483 or multiple 483s, but all you have to do is respond to these with a corrective action plan and corrections, and you have to implement those, and they will have another routine visit, hopefully, and come back and close those down. The third possibility is much more dire consequences for your company because it's official action indicated. And if the FDA inspector suspects that that might be the outcome of the audit, they're supposed to let the district office know that immediately. They're not supposed to wait and finish the inspection. They're supposed to let them know right away there might be official action indicated. And depending on what kinds of things they're finding, they may invite other FDA inspectors to come help them, or they may take action immediately. They may take samples back with them. They may spend a lot longer there than they had planned on it. You may get a warning letter. And another possibility, if you've already had a warning letter in the past and you're a foreign firm, you might be put under automatic detention. So, avoiding the warning letters. The #1 way to get a warning letter, if you really want one, don't respond to the 483 within 15 business days. I don't suggest this. If you're wondering what will happen, you'll probably be fired. Because I know somebody, a friend of mine, he was a day late, and automatically the FDA issued a warning letter, and he lost his job. Management wasn't too happy with the warning letter. So if people wonder where does this come from, the FDA inspector didn't mention this. Well, it's documented in the 2009 notice by the FDA, and I provided a link there. It says if you don't respond within 15 days, that unwritten policy they used to have is now a written policy. They will automatically issue a warning letter if they don't receive it on time. In your response to the FDA, this is something I see a lot of companies do, and it's really important you get this point. When you respond with your corrective action plan, use your CAPA forms. Please use your CAPA forms. The FDA likes to see that you're using your CAPA forms. You should not write a memo. Everybody seems to write memos. I don't know where that idea came from. Maybe it's something historical before my time. It's not a good practice. The FDA inspectors would prefer to see you using your CAPA process. And if your CAPA form doesn't lend itself to responding to the FDA, then get a new CAPA form. Redesign it so it does work. If you have an 8D CAPA form, it will work just fine for the FDA because it has a space in there for investigation of root cause. It has a place in there for identifying what the root cause is. It has a place for corrections, containment, and corrective actions. It has a place for effectiveness checks to verify that everything that you implemented worked. And if you don't have a corrective action form that does that for your CAPA process, get a new one. And don't forget the corrections. I got to tell you, there are so many responses that I see from the FDA that say your response to their 483s was inadequate because you didn't identify corrections to the problem that they identified, or if the corrective actions weren't complete. So if you're really not sure about this, we have CAPA training. You can take that as well. It's also available as a webinar. We provide you also with a procedure for CAPA and some forms for CAPA. So I've done so many CAPAs in my day now. I can crank out a CAPA in minutes, but you can't do an investigation in minutes. And you really need to learn how to do investigation. So that's part of the training is 5 different tools I think we provide on how to do a root cause analysis. You want to give the inspectors the impression you've done a very thorough investigation and you've identified the true root cause for systemic problems, and they're not going to ever come back. And you never want to give the FDA inspector the impression that you're trying to obstruct their inspection or hiding information, both during the inspection and in your responses. This is something that's come up recently for me. I haven't done a lot of work in the past with foreign firms, except when I was doing ISO audits in Canada or Mexico. But recently I've had some foreign firms that have asked me specifically to help them address automatic detention or import alerts. This is where the FDA has given you a second warning letter, and the company thought things were okay during the inspection, but then the final report came back and it was official action indicated, and they were put on automatic detention, which means they couldn't ship anymore. And this shocked them because they didn't think the inspection went so badly. But it was repeat findings that when they went back to the district office, the inspector was told, you got to write this up as a warning letter with automatic detention or import alert. And they might use different wording, but that is the outcome. You can't ship any product. And it's going to get worse because not only can't you ship product, the FDA won't let you ship any product. Submitting a plan isn't enough. They actually have to come back and do another inspection showing that all your corrective actions were effective. So this is a level 3 inspection coming back to close down previous findings, and they're not going to schedule that for another 12 to 18 months because you're a foreign firm and they want to give you time to really do it right. They don't give you second chances. This is a disaster for a company because they're going to have no shipments whatsoever to the FDA, to the US, for a 12 to 18 month period. And there are very, very few circumstances where you can get it done in shorter amount of time. Even if you think you can, the FDA won't work faster. So this is really a problem for foreign firms. And so when you get your first warning letter, that's a clue, a really loud signal from the FDA. Get help immediately. Do not wait for number 2. Get help and get really good qualified help. We're nearing the end here. When you get a 483, one of the things that a lot of companies do is they'll do what they call a 5 why analysis. And I'm just amazed by how shallow their investigations are. They say, oh, I got to change this procedure wording, so I changed the procedure to tell them to do what they didn't do, and I asked them to sign this training document that says they read and understood the procedure. Done. Isn't my CAPA effective? No. You need a CAPA that identifies the true, real root cause. And unfortunately, a lot of times the issue is not that they didn't have training or you didn't have a procedure, but that it wasn't effective. You need to really understand the requirements thoroughly for 820, which is the QSR or quality system requirements, 803, which is the medical device reporting requirements and is changing, and then 806 for recall or corrections and removals. And if you're not sure about the QSR requirements, you can click on that link for our webinars page. We have a whole list of webinars, and one of those is 21 CFR 820 compliance. And this one here, it's under an hour for the actual presentation. It's only 29 slides. The QSR training, it's 52 slides. It's a 90-minute recording. It's one of the best I've done. And it's a great value because you're getting a thorough, in-depth training on the QSR. And then to make sure it's effective, I came up with 20 questions. They're multiple choice and fill in the blank, but they're tough questions that require you to think and read carefully the question and go back and hunt through the QSR. They're open book, open notes, but it forces people to really study. And I have very few people that get a perfect score. Most people get 80s, but 70 is passing. So you're probably passed, but you're going to work at it to get it. And you get a certificate at the end saying that you passed. And if you take this training, it increases your chances of passing. It's not really a pass-fail with the inspections, but going through your next FDA inspection with no action indicated. You want that to be your outcome. And so that would be priceless if you had an FDA inspection, no observations. Might even get a raise. So that brings us to the end of the presentation. If you're listening to a recording, just email me any questions. I'll be happy to help. But I believe Terry or Glenn is on the line, and they have some questions for us.
Oh, hi, Rob. That was an excellent overview. Thank you. Yeah, we have a couple of questions that we've collected over time. And one of the questions is interesting because I think it's implied, but it wasn't really stated. Can the FDA issue a warning letter immediately without even issuing a 483 observation?
No, they can't.
Yay.
Like I indicated, there's if you have official action indicated, so a warning letter would be the scenario in this case, you have to notify the district office right away as an inspector. And you can't take the action by yourself. You need to get your superiors to approve this. And the wording of it is critical. So you may warn the company that I think we're going to have official action indicated. You're probably going to get a warning letter. Here's what the issues are. But you might not. You might not even be sure that that's going to be the outcome, and it might be only after you get back to your district office and your boss reviews your notes in your inspection report. They say, we really need to issue a warning letter here. And so you will not get a warning letter at the end of your inspection. You'll get an inspection report at the end of your inspection, but a warning letter might be coming.
Okay. That's a good answer. Thank you. And here's another question. What should you do if you find out your subject matter expert that's in the hot seat and starts answering questions incorrectly? I mean, how would you even know?
Well, we all get nervous.
Okay.
That just
Yeah.
happens. No matter
Yeah.
what, you answer the question incorrectly, and what do you do in that scenario? Well, do not try to answer the question for the person, because that gives the FDA inspector the impression that you are trying to hide something or conceal something. You want to have confidence in your people and give them the confidence that they can answer the question correctly. And if they're nervous, just tell them to relax and calm down and start over again. If they just made a mistake or they're answering the question incorrectly, say, I think what the inspector is looking for is this question, the answer to this question, and reword it for them. And that's also what we tell ISO auditees to say. When they try to answer for the interviewee. We say, no, 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 I want this person to answer. I don't want you to answer for them because I'm testing their knowledge and their training and skill. You can reword the question for them, but don't answer for them.
Okay, that's a good answer. Do you have any recommendations for a mock FDA inspection as part of preparation?
For a mock FDA inspection, one of the key things to know is when was your last one so you can time it correctly. You want to be about 6 months before your next FDA inspection, no less than 4 months before, because you want time to address any corrective actions before the FDA inspection might occur. You should also know a little bit about the history of your district, know whether they're on a 2-year cycle, more than 2 year, or less than 2 year, and it helps to have some history with the FDA. You can also ask around with your friends at other companies in the area, and they might be able to clue you in as to what it's like. And if they're in the same area, they may not work in a competitive product category, but they'll know a lot about the FDA inspector and be able to share notes with you. And so it's nice to have friends in the same business and chat with each other. Some companies will even come up with good profiles that they'll share electronically about the inspector. And so there's a hidden underground of information out there. But when you are doing an FDA mock inspection, so you're preparing your people internally, one of the things you want to consider is, are we going to have 1 inspector or 2? If you're going to have 2 inspectors, you want to have your mock FDA inspection also be 2, so you can prepare people for being spread thin and being pulled in 2 different directions and having the same resource needed by both inspectors or both mock inspectors. So that's a key thing that you can do. You want to have the people that are doing the mock FDA inspections, they need to be experienced in what the QSIT requirements are and the QSR. They should know it basically by rote. They should be that well skilled. And it doesn't hurt to have somebody that is a little bit intimidating, and your nice friendly person that works with them all the time in their job is not going to intimidate them. An unknown from the outside will. And so a lot of companies recommend using ex-FDA inspectors because they have that unknown element. They don't know them well. They used to work for the FDA. They're going to put us through the ringer. I have the advantage of I'm 6'6", and I know how to do a brutal audit of production areas and how to dig through records like nobody's business because I've done so much training and auditing. But not everybody has that, so you're going to use what tools you have available to you as an auditor to try to simulate the FDA inspection environment and prepare people. But do not, in the middle of your inspection, stop and start giving them advice. Wait until you're over with it and then give them the advice.
Okay, excellent. Can you recommend any software to help track document requests during an audit?
There's nothing that I'm aware of out there that's like software that is advertised as this is the software you should use for an FDA inspection to track things.
Right.
There are a few companies that have developed software specifically for that purpose, but I haven't seen it advertised, which makes me think that either the company doesn't have a really great product or it's a really small market, and maybe that's why. But the best software tools I've seen out there that have been used were homegrown, where the company developed their own software or contracted a company to develop it for them. But basically, the software that those companies are using is basically like a chat room. Every single thing that is mentioned, every request, is entered by the scribe in the chat box and goes to the back room, and the back room assigns people to work on it. And so it keeps track of who requested what when, and when it was requested, who's supposed to go get it. And I honestly think if I were going to use a software tool, I would just go with a wiki platform that has Part 11 compliance. The reason why I want Part 11 compliance is because, not because I'm going to show the FDA this tool, but because I want something that can keep track of all changes and who entered it and when they entered it. And I want a wiki that is going to be web-based, which almost all wikis are, because I want bosses from other locations to be able to log in and see how the inspection's going. Because they're going to ask, you don't want them in the front of the back room. You'd rather keep them in their office asking questions remotely. So give them the ability to log in, look at the chat room real time, and see how the inspection's going and see what requests are being made. And they might be helpful. The other thing that's really nice about the wiki tool is now it's going to all be recorded. It's Part 11 compliant. You're going to have an electronic record that you can use long term, and this is going to really be helpful to you for preparing for your next FDA inspection. You're going to have this record of all the requests that were made and when they were requested, and if anybody needs any details, they can go back and get it.
That's excellent. I never thought of a wiki to because it's all captured, and it's that's an awesome idea.
Yeah, and anybody can
Yeah,
enter in it real time, simultaneously.
that's true. That is terrific answer.
And some of them are even color coded.
No,
I've seen
wow.
some color coded ones that tell you who wrote what when, just
Yeah,
by color code.
that's terrific. That's just a great answer, Rob. Thank you. And I have one last question, and it could be it could be sticky here. What should you do for drinks, lunch, and snacks for the FDA? I mean, what are you allowed to even give them?
The 70s and 80s are gone. We can no longer
Yeah,
wine and dine the FDA
right.
and take them out to lunch and get them drunk. That doesn't work anymore.
Right.
The FDA trains all the inspectors that they are not supposed to accept any lunch. They're supposed to go out for lunch. They're
Okay.
not supposed to accept anything that could be perceived as a bribe in any way, shape, or form.
Well,
So
water.
it's
Water.
fine to give coffee, juice, and water is fine,
Okay.
but put it in the middle of the table
Oh,
and
I
offer it
see.
to
Yeah.
everybody, not just the FDA.
Okay.
It's not unheard of to have the FDA ask if there's a coffee jar that they can put money into.
Mm.
That does actually happen. They are going above and beyond to eliminate all perception of any quid pro quo or bias caused by bribery. So
Right.
they're not going to go out for lunch with you. They're not going to
Right.
tell you where they're going. They're probably going to go to Subway.
Right. Right. So if you bring
And
in this elaborate catered lunch,
yeah,
they're gonna have to leave.
bring it for your back room because they
Okay.
deserve it, and the
Right.
FDA is not going to eat it.
Right. Gotcha. Yeah, that was a really good answer, but that could get sticky. Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
and you can count on it. They're going to take a break for lunch. They're
sure.
government employees. They're
Exactly.
going to take their time out. They can stay there as many days as they need to. So
Uh-huh.
if they want to stay 2 weeks, 3 weeks, they will.
Mm-hmm.
And so when lunch comes, just ask them when they expect to be back. They may or may not tell you. They may not even come back. They
Right.
might get a call that they need to urgently go visit some other manufacturer with bigger problems. That's actually happened at one of the companies was at where the inspector went out at lunchtime and then called and said, "I'm not coming back. I have a bigger problem somewhere else."
Right.
And later on, we found out there was a big recall down the road. So it happens. And but if you have them at your facility and you want to give them drinks, which is a nice hospitable thing to do, put it in the middle of the table and offer it to them, but make sure everybody else takes one because they don't want to give any perception they're favoring you in any way because they've been bribed.
Right, and that's excellent advice because you're even if you're just trying to be nice and you've ordered for your whole crew and you say it's available, I guess depending on the level of what
They're
you're,
not staying for lunch.
yeah,
No
okay,
matter what, they're not staying for
they
lunch.
can't, yeah, okay. So, well, I think that's all the questions we have right now. Is there anything else that you could think of that you'd like
Yeah.
to add? But again, if you have any
Well,
questions,
I have my
oh,
last slide.
there you go. If you need a
Yeah.
mock FDA inspection,
Yeah.
there's Rob.
Yeah. Yep. So you can contact me by email, cell phone, Skype. I even prepare proposals for companies in other countries. So I just recently submitted one to a company in Galway that wanted help with an FDA inspection.
Yes, and if you are international, Rob is on Skype all the time now, and that seems to be an effective tool for communication for you. Um, it's like you're
Yep. Yeah, I get 4 a.m. calls from Galway and 9 p.m. calls with New Zealand.
just so everybody knows, Rob doesn't sleep, so call him anytime. All right, Rob, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate today. That was a great overview and terrific answers, and you're very experienced, and we just so appreciate you giving this information away.
Thank you, Terry.
Okay, have a nice evening.